Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into post-war Europe.
Ooh, sounds fascinating.
Yeah, and get this, we're actually taking a deep dive into a book that you recommended.
Oh, right.
Postwar, A History of Europe Since 1945 by Tony Judt.
Stick great.
Yeah, get ready for some serious aha moments because we're going to uncover the most significant events, turning points, maybe some hidden gems too, all from this really pivotal period.
Yeah, and what I think is really striking about Jut's work is that he doesn't really sugarcoat anything. He just throws us right into the stark realities of 1945.
Yeah.
And he does that by showing us how Europe is not just grappling with unimaginable destruction, but also socially and politically, just this total upheaval.
Well, and it is hard to comprehend the scale of the devastation. I mean, Judd paints this really vivid picture of Europe in ruins.
Yeah.
Just destroyed homes, transportation systems that are just crippled, and diseases like tuberculosis just running rampant.
Oh, yeah.
Like, did you know that in Warsaw, 90%
Crazy.
of homes were destroyed?
Yeah.
90%.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling.
It's hard to even fathom that, and it really sets the stage for understanding, the just immense challenges that Europe was facing at that time.
Right.
And, it's one thing to talk about physical destruction, but the war's impact went far beyond that. You have millions of people displaced.
Yeah.
Leading to just massive social upheaval. Like one example is the expulsion of ethnic Germans from Eastern Europe.
Wow.
It created this refugee crisis of unprecedented proportions. I mean, just absolutely massive.
It's like trying to piece together a continent.
Oh, yeah.
That has just been completely shattered into a million pieces.
Right.
And then in the midst of all of this chaos, you have this urgent need to deal with the legacy of the Nazi regime.
Right.
And Judd dives into that too, right? He
Yeah.
dives into the complexities of seeking justice after such unimaginable atrocities.
Yeah, he talks about how the Nuremberg trials, while definitely controversial in some aspects, were a landmark event. They set a precedent for international law. Yeah. And forced Europe and the world, really, to confront the horrors of the Holocaust. And Judd also highlights how these trials actually shaped national narratives and identities in the post-war period.
So you have this backdrop of just utter devastation.
Right.
A continent that's just struggling to rebuild.
Yeah.
And then from these ashes rise all these different visions for the future.
Yeah.
And that's where we really start to see the emergence of distinct political and economic orders.
Exactly. So you have Eastern Europe
Yeah.
under the influence of the Soviet Union.
Right.
And they see the rise of communism.
Right.
While in Western Europe, they embark on a very different path.
And one of the key players in Western Europe's recovery is the Marshall Plan.
Yeah. I mean, it's often hailed as this massive success story.
For sure.
But Judd, he throws in this really fascinating twist.
Okay.
The Marshall Plan, despite pumping billions of dollars into the reconstruction of Western Europe,
Right.
was actually met with, a good amount of criticism in France. Yeah, because they saw it as like a potential tool for American dominance.
Ah, okay.
And they worried about the economic and political strings that would be attached.
It's a powerful reminder that even amidst like this desperate need for aid, national pride, and just strategic concerns, we're still very much at play.
Absolutely, yeah.
And of course, all of this is happening under the shadow of the emerging Cold War.
Yes. The Cold War just casts this long shadow over everything. It divides Europe, not just geographically with the Iron Curtain,
Right.
but also ideologically.
Totally.
So you see this really stark contrast between the capitalist West and the communist East.
Yeah.
And, naturally this tension fuels decades of mistrust and military buildup.
So how did this global standoff influence the lives of everyday Europeans? Judt draws this really interesting connection between the Cold War and the development of welfare states across Europe.
So the welfare state, with its emphasis on social safety nets and public services, emerges in all these different forms across Europe. Now, you might think, oh, this was a purely socialist project.
Right.
But Judt presents a more nuanced view. In Britain, for example, it was actually more of a pragmatic response to the very real fear of returning to the mass unemployment that plagued the pre-war years.
So it's not just about ideology. It's about ensuring social stability and, in a way, preventing the spread of communist ideals by addressing the economic anxieties of the working class.
Absolutely. And it's really fascinating to see how different countries tackled this challenge. Judt contrasts the Scandinavian model, which embraced a more comprehensive universal approach to welfare, with the British Compromise, which adopted a more limited and means-tested system.
It highlights how historical context, political ideologies, and economic realities all converge to shape these pivotal social developments. It's a reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's more like this complex tapestry of interconnected events and ideas.
And Judt is a master weaver. He brings together all these seemingly disparate threads to create this really rich and insightful narrative. He doesn't just tell us what happened, he actually explains why it matters and how it continues to shape the Europe we see today.
Okay, so we've covered the immediate post-war landscape, the political and economic reconstruction, and the rise of the welfare state. But Europe's transformation didn't stop there, right?
No, not at all.
We see this incredible cultural and social dynamism kind of emerging as well.
Absolutely. Judt takes us on this whirlwind tour of cultural effervescence, new theatrical movements that were pushing boundaries. You have the French New Wave revolutionizing cinema, and these bold architectural styles that were really redefining cityscapes.
It's like Europe's experiencing this artistic rebirth,
a
burst of creative energy after years of war and oppression.
What's really insightful is how Judt links these cultural shifts to these broader social and economic trends. He talks about the rise of consumerism and youth culture in the 1950s and 60s that was really fueled by economic growth and technological advancements.
Think about it. Suddenly there's this newfound prosperity. People have more disposable income. And a whole generation's coming of age with a different set of expectations and aspirations. It's just this recipe for social change.
Exactly. And this newfound freedom and prosperity had such a profound impact on cultural expression. It challenged traditional norms, sparked these new artistic movements, and ultimately reshaped European society.
And it wasn't just about material goods and leisure activities either. Just highlights the crucial role that intellectuals and artists played in shaping the cultural landscape. Think about figures like Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus, whose existentialist philosophies really captured the anxieties and uncertainties of the post-war world.
Their ideas really resonated deeply with a generation that was grappling with the aftermath of war. And they were searching for meaning in a world that seemingly was devoid of absolutes. And don't forget the impact of the Frankfurt School, whose critical theories challenged these established power structures and sparked all these debates about social inequality and the nature of capitalism.
So we have this fascinating interplay of economic, social, and intellectual forces all kind of converging in this period. And then boom, the 1960s hit. A decade that Judt describes as a turning point, a time of radical social change and upheaval.
The 1960s were this period of intense intellectual ferment marked by student protests, anti-war movements, and a real questioning of traditional values and hierarchies. It was a decade that shook the foundations of European society.
For sure.
And left this really enduring legacy.
This wasn't just about youthful rebellion, was it?
I don't think so.
Judt argues that this wave of unrest was a reaction to the perceived stifling conformity of the post-war years. It's almost like this delayed response to the trauma and upheaval of the war finally finding an outlet.
And it's so fascinating to see how this desire for change manifested in all these different ways across Europe. Judt draws this really interesting parallel between the student protests in the West and the challenges to Soviet authority in Eastern Europe, like the Prague Spring in Czechoslovakia.
On the surface, they might seem like totally separate events. But they both represent this yearning for greater freedom and self-determination. It's this rejection of the status quo.
And it's really striking how these challenges were met with very different responses. In the West, protests often led to reforms and greater social and political openness. But in the East, they were met with brutal repression, which really exposed the limits of reform within the Soviet system.
It's a stark reminder of the deep divisions that still existed between East and West. Even as Europe was experiencing this wave of cultural and social change. But even in the West, this period of optimism and progress wouldn't last forever, would it?
Unfortunately not.
No.
Judt takes us into the 1970s, a decade that he portrays as a time of economic challenges and growing disillusionment.
Okay.
He points to a couple different factors like the oil crisis, the breakdown of the Bretton Woods system, rising inflation. All these things were contributing to a sense of instability and uncertainty.
And this economic turmoil had really profound social and political consequences, right? It wasn't just about numbers.
Right.
It impacted people's lives, their livelihoods, their hopes for the future.
Absolutely. Judt argues that this economic anxiety led to a growing critique of the welfare state.
Interesting.
Which was seen by some as unsustainable and inefficient. And it really paved the way for the emergence of neoliberal ideas, which emphasized free markets, deregulation, and individual responsibility.
So we see this shift in the political landscape, a move away from the social democratic consensus of the post-war era towards a more market-oriented approach.
And this shift wasn't just confined to economics. It had these cultural implications as well.
Really?
Yeah. Judt discusses the rise of terrorism in several European countries during this period.
Wow.
And he links it to anxieties about the future and a sense of disillusionment with the established order.
Yeah.
You know, groups like the Red Army faction in Germany and the Red Brigades in Italy carried out these acts of violence targeting symbols of authority and the capitalist system.
It's such a dark and unsettling chapter, a stark contrast to the hope and idealism of the 1960s.
Right, but as Judt shows, it's also a period of profound transformation, one that sets the stage for the even more dramatic events that would unfold in the 1980s.
And that is where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive into Judt's post-war.
Welcome back. When we left off, Europe was navigating the turbulent 1970s.
Yeah.
A time of, economic upheaval and societal anxieties.
Totally.
But as we move into the 1980s, Judt takes us on this truly remarkable journey, one that culminates in the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War.
It's 1989. It feels like something out of a movie script.
I know.
The Berlin Wall, a symbol of division for nearly 3 decades, just crumbles. Communist regimes across Eastern Europe collapse like dominoes, and the seemingly invincible Soviet Union implodes. It's hard to overstate the magnitude of this historical shift.
It was a moment of both exhilaration and, disbelief.
Right.
You know, suddenly this impenetrable barrier dividing Europe, both physically and ideologically, was gone.
It's gone.
And for millions of people in Eastern Europe, it meant newfound freedom, the chance to finally shape their own destinies after decades of living under authoritarian rule.
Well, it's this whole continent's taking a collective breath, stepping into this uncharted territory. But as Judt points out, this transition from communism to democracy and from planned economies to market-based systems was far from smooth.
Oh, absolutely. There was this initial euphoria, this sense of liberation. But, that quickly gave way to the harsh realities of building new political institutions, reforming economies, and just grappling with the legacy of the communist past.
Judt doesn't shy away from exploring those challenges.
Nope.
He talks about the difficulties of establishing democratic norms and practices in countries that had little experience with them. He highlights the economic shock therapy, the rapid privatization and liberalization that often led to widespread unemployment, social dislocation, and a rise in inequality.
Yeah, and, it wasn't just about economic hardship.
Right.
There were these really profound social and psychological adjustments to make.
For sure.
People had to adapt to a whole new way of life, a new set of values, a new sense of individual responsibility. Imagine having your entire world just turned upside down.
It's one thing to tear down a wall, but rebuilding a society, like a whole system of governance and economics, is a monumental undertaking.
Yeah.
And then there's the question of dealing with the past, right? Judt delves into the complexities of coming to terms with the legacy of communist rule.
He talks about the challenges of dealing with former collaborators and perpetrators of human rights abuses. He explores the debates over illustration, that process of vetting individuals for past ties to the communist regime, and he discusses the quest for transitional justice.
It's got to be a painful and often divisive process as countries grapple with questions of guilt, responsibility, and reconciliation.
It's almost like Europe's undergoing this collective therapy session, trying to reconcile the past with the present and chart a course for the future. And as Judt points out, this process of redefining national identities in the post-communist era wasn't without its own set of challenges. The collapse of communism created this vacuum, leaving many people searching for new sources of meaning and belonging. And in some cases, this led to a resurgence of nationalism, ethnic tensions, and even violent conflict.
What we saw tragically in the former Yugoslavia.
Exactly.
Judt's account of the Yugoslav wars is particularly harrowing.
Yeah.
He doesn't hold back in describing the brutality of the conflict, the ethnic cleansing, the sheer senselessness of it all. It's a stark reminder that even in a region that had enjoyed relative stability for decades, these deep-seated ethnic and historical tensions can erupt with devastating consequences.
It's a really sobering reminder of the fragility of peace and the dangers of political opportunism. Judt points to figures like Slobodan Milošević in Serbia and Franjo Tuđman in Croatia, who exploited ethnic divisions for their own political gain, inflaming tensions and inciting violence. It's a tragic example of how nationalist rhetoric and political manipulation can lead to unimaginable suffering.
So we have this backdrop of both hope and despair, of new beginnings and old wounds resurfacing. But amidst this complexity, there's also this sense of possibility. The end of the Cold War opens up these new avenues for cooperation and integration, leading to the expansion of the European Union and the creation of the euro.
The European Union, as Judt explores it, is this ambitious project, this grand experiment in supranational governance.
It's fascinating, really.
It is. It's about bringing together countries that were once bitter enemies. It's about fostering economic cooperation and creating this sense of shared identity and purpose.
Yeah.
But, as Judt points out, this project of European integration was fraught with its own set of complexities and challenges.
It's like this massive puzzle trying to fit together pieces that don't always align perfectly.
Exactly.
Judt talks about the debates over the pace of enlargement, the criteria for membership, the delicate balance of power between Brussels and national governments.
Yeah.
He highlights the economic disparities between different regions of Europe, the concerns about a democratic deficit, the anxieties about loss of sovereignty.
It's the balancing act. Trying to reconcile the aspirations for a united Europe with the realities of diverse national interests, economic inequalities, and historical baggage.
And let's not forget the euro.
Right.
This was a bold move,
Right.
creating a single currency for a diverse group of countries. It was seen as a symbol of unity and the driver of economic integration. But as we all know, it also created new vulnerabilities.
The 2008 financial crisis really exposed the flaws in the system. Suddenly, countries with very different economic structures and fiscal policies were bound together by a single currency. And it created this ripple effect, with economic woes in one country impacting the entire Eurozone.
So Judt's arguing that there's this inherent tension at the heart of the European project, this tension between the political aspirations for unity and the economic realities of integration.
Precisely. He's not saying that the European Union is doomed to fail, but he's highlighting the need for greater political cohesion and solidarity if it's going to weather the storms of the 21st century. And this tension, as we'll see, becomes even more pronounced in the years following Judt's writing.
This is what makes his analysis so compelling.
I know.
He's writing in 2005, before the full impact of the Eurozone crisis, before the refugee crisis, before Brexit, and yet he identifies many of the underlying trends and tensions that would come to define European politics in the years to come.
His insights are remarkably prescient. He talks about the rise of populism and Euroscepticism, fueled by economic anxieties, concerns about immigration, and this sense of loss of national sovereignty. And he argues that these sentiments, if left unchecked, could pose a serious threat to the European project.
It's like he's peering into the future, warning us of the potential pitfalls, the cracks in the foundation that could widen if not addressed.
Yeah.
And this brings us to the heart of Judt's message, his call for a deeper understanding of history, not just as a collection of facts and dates, but as a guide for navigating the present and shaping the future.
He emphasizes the importance of memory, of remembering both the triumphs and the tragedies of the past. And he argues that a society's ability to confront its history, to learn from its mistakes, is essential for its moral and political health.
It's about acknowledging the complexities, the ambiguities, the dark chapters alongside the moments of progress and enlightenment. And it's about recognizing that history isn't something static, something confined to textbooks. It's a living force that shapes our identities, our values, our understanding of the world.
So what does this all mean for Europe in the 21st century? What lessons can be drawn from this really tumultuous post-war period?
Judt doesn't offer any easy answers. He doesn't pretend to have a crystal ball. But he provides us with a framework for thinking critically about the challenges Europe faces. A framework that's rooted in a deep understanding of history, a recognition of the enduring power of ideas, and a belief in the possibility of progress, however elusive it may be. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're in the final stretch now of our exploration of Tony Judt's Postwar.
I can't believe it's almost over.
I know, it's flown by. But we've covered so much. War, reconstruction, ideology, cultural shifts, economic anxieties, and now I think it's time we shift our focus to the 21st century.
Okay.
And see how Judt grapples with this, evolving identity and future of Europe and a world that's changing really rapidly.
Yeah. One of the key developments Judd examines is the continued expansion of the European Union, which is this really remarkable project aimed at bringing greater unity and cooperation to a continent that has this long history of division and conflict.
Right.
But with everything Judd analyzes, he doesn't just present this rosy picture,
No, he never does.
He delves into the complexities, the triumphs alongside the tribulations.
And it makes you think about how, even with the best intentions, uniting such diverse nations with their unique histories, cultures, and economic realities is bound to create some friction.
Absolutely. Judd talks about the economic disparities between the older, more established members of the EU and the newer member states.
Right.
Many of which were still grappling with the legacy of communism.
Right.
So there were these concerns about whether those economies were ready for integration and whether it would exacerbate existing inequalities.
Yeah.
And then you have the political and cultural dimensions.
Right. You could just imagine how joining this kind of supranational entity
Yeah.
would raise all these questions about national sovereignty, cultural identity,
For sure.
and the balance of power between Brussels and individual member states.
Exactly. And one of the most contentious issues Judd tackles is the question of Turkish membership in the EU.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Which really tapped into these deep-seated historical and cultural anxieties. Anxieties about Europe's identity, its borders, and its relationship with the Islamic world.
It highlights how, even as the EU strives for unity, there are these fundamental questions about who belongs, who gets to define Europeanness, and how to navigate these differences in a way that promotes both inclusion and cohesion.
Right. It's a challenge that Europe continues to grapple with today. And Judd's insights, even though they were written before the refugee crisis and the rise of populist movements, feel incredibly relevant to understanding these contemporary debates.
It's amazing how a book published almost 20 years ago can still feel so timely, so insightful.
That's the mark of a truly great historian, you know? Judd doesn't just recount events, he connects them, analyzes them, and helps us understand their broader significance. And one of the recurring themes in post-war is this idea that Europe cannot escape its history. The past isn't something to be simply left behind. It shapes the present in profound ways.
It's like those echoes we talked about earlier, the reverberations of war, ideology, and social upheaval that continue to influence Europe's trajectory.
Exactly. And this leads us to one of the most crucial aspects of Judd's analysis, the importance of memory. He argues that a society's ability to remember its past, both the triumphs and the tragedies, is essential for its moral and political health.
It's about facing those uncomfortable truths, acknowledging the mistakes, and learning from them.
Right. And this is especially crucial in a continent like Europe with its long and often bloody history. Judd reminds us that the scars of the past, from the Holocaust to the Yugoslav wars, are still visible. They're still shaping the present.
It's not about dwelling on the past or wallowing in guilt.
No.
It's about using memory as a tool for understanding, for building a more just and humane future.
And this brings us to this core question that Judd poses at the end of Postwar. What does Europe's experience tell us about the possibilities and challenges of building a better world in the 21st century?
It's a big question, one that we could probably spend hours dissecting. But I think one of the key takeaways is that history offers no easy answers, no guaranteed formulas for success.
For sure.
It's a reminder that progress is hard-won. It requires constant vigilance, a willingness to confront difficult truths, and a commitment to dialogue and understanding.
And I think Judd, despite his unflinching analysis of Europe's struggles and contradictions, leaves us with this sense of cautious optimism. He reminds us that Europe, despite its flaws, has achieved some remarkable things in the post-war era. It's a continent that has, for the most part, overcome centuries of division and conflict to create a zone of peace and prosperity.
It's a testament to the human capacity for change, for cooperation, for building something better out of the ruins of the past.
And while Europe, just like the rest of the world, faces new challenges in the 21st century, from climate change to technological disruption to the resurgence of authoritarianism, Judt's work offers us this valuable framework for navigating these turbulent waters. It's a call to engage with history, to learn from its lessons, and to apply those lessons to the challenges of our time.
If you're at all interested in deepening your understanding of Europe's transformation since World War II, Postwar is a must-read. We've just scratched the surface here, but hopefully our deep dive has sparked your curiosity and given you a taste of the incredible insights that Judt offers.
It's a book that will challenge your assumptions, expand your perspectives, and leave you with a much deeper appreciation for the complexities of history and the enduring relevance of the past.
And for those of you who want to delve even deeper into this remarkable book, we've provided a convenient affiliate link in our show notes. Just click the link and you'll be one step closer to embarking on your own journey through post-war Europe with Tony Judt as your guide.
It's a journey well worth taking, one that will stay with you long after you've turned the final page.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time for another deep dive into a topic that's sure to make you think, learn, and maybe even change the way you see the world.